This video is based on the knowledge of Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis. Freud revealed an uncomfortable yet liberating truth. Most of your life is not governed by reason. It is governed by a powerful and invisible territory known as the unconscious. And it is there, hidden even from yourself, that your desires are born, your fears, and most of all, your self-sabotaging patterns. Have you ever noticed how, just when things start going well, a part of you finds a way to mess everything up? You get close to a healthy relationship and then pull away. You have the chance to grow professionally, but procrastinate. You begin to feel at peace and suddenly create conflict. Freud explained this with clarity. Humans don't just fear failure, they also fear success. And often, we sabotage ourselves not out of weakness, but from unconscious loyalty to old pain. In this video, you'll understand why, even though you consciously want happiness, you keep repeating patterns that lead you away from it. You'll see how guilt, repression, trauma, and internalized beliefs shape a mind that works against you, even when it thinks it's protecting you. More importantly, you'll learn how to identify these mechanisms and begin reclaiming control over your emotional life. So like this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment below. I want to stop sabotaging my own happiness. Because the first step to change is facing what you've always avoided. Chapter 1. When happiness feels threatening. Freud observed a strange phenomenon in the clinic. The closer a patient got to experiencing real pleasure, the more internal resistance would surface, not from the outside but from within. It was as if happiness, so long desired, became something dangerous. To understand this, we need to go deeper into the structure of the mind. From a young age, many of us are taught, directly or indirectly, to be suspicious of joy. We grow up hearing that if you laugh too much today, you'll cry tomorrow. That too much happiness brings envy. That life isn't supposed to be easy. And if you were raised in emotionally unstable environments, whether emotionally or financially, your mind likely learned to link joy with punishment. The unconscious makes a connection. After something good comes something bad, so it starts to anticipate pain. It sabotages before life can. This shows up in subtle and not so subtle ways. You begin a promising relationship, but feel an unexplainable anxiety. You achieve something you've wanted for years and feel empty the next day. You receive a compliment and quickly dismiss it with self-criticism. Freud called this the repetition compulsion, an unconscious urge to relive familiar pain even when circumstances have changed. Because for the psyche, familiar suffering is less threatening than unfamiliar peace. When a pleasure was never safely integrated during childhood, it can feel risky. It lowers your guard. And since the unconscious associates vulnerability with danger, it chooses protection, even if that means rejecting joy. In other words, you don't avoid happiness because you're weak. You avoid it because, deep down, your mind learned it wasn't safe. And unless this association is brought into awareness, you'll keep repeating the cycle. Chapter 2. The invisible guilt. Freud identified guilt as one of the most silent and destructive forces in the human psyche. It doesn't always show itself clearly. Most of the time, it manifests as self-sabotage, as an inner discomfort without a name, as a void you try to fill, but never quite can. Unconscious guilt arises when something inside you believes you don't deserve what you're experiencing. It convinces you without words that there is some kind of debt to your family, to your past, to the pain of others, or to your own story. And what's curious is that you may be achieving your dreams and still carrying the weight of betraying something or someone simply by going beyond what was expected of you. Freud paid close attention to this internal conflict. The mind wants to grow, conquer, love, be free. But inside, there is a hidden judge that says, this isn't for you. This judge is formed in childhood, shaped by messages we receive directly or indirectly. Phrases like, don't be selfish. You should feel guilty for that. Who do you think you are to want more? They become encoded in the superego, the psychic structure that represents internalized norms, morals, and expectations. So what happens? When you begin to approach real happiness, the superego sounds the alarm. It makes you hesitate, makes you doubt, pushes you back down. You create problems where none existed. You find a reason to fight, to walk away, to give up. You reject pleasure because part of you believes you don't deserve it. This guilt is invisible, but it governs major decisions in your life. And the most troubling part, often you're not even aware that you're punishing yourself. That's why Freud said the work of analysis is to bring to consciousness what has been repressed, because only when you see the mechanism clearly can you begin to question it. And the question here is, where did you learn that being too happy is wrong? Who taught you that you have to suffer in order to deserve love? Maybe you don't need more effort. Maybe you just need less guilt. Chapter 3. The Pleasure of Suffering. Freud was one of the first to observe that not all pain is rejected. Some pains, over time, become a kind of emotional shelter, not because they comfort, but because they feel familiar. There's a strange kind of safety in what has hurt you many times. Repeated suffering can turn into identity. Constant frustration becomes part of the narrative. This always happens to me, and at a certain point, you don't even know if you truly want to escape it or just be understood within it. Freud called this phenomenon the secondary gain. When pain starts to offer some form of unconscious benefit, it can bring attention. It grants you permission not to take risks. It becomes the justification for not changing. Subtly, the mind begins to associate suffering with protection. After all, if you're already broken, no one can disappoint you. If you expect the worst, you can't be surprised. And so the person settles into a cycle of self-sabotage, not because they desire failure, but because they fear losing the familiarity of pain. The repetition of suffering becomes predictable, and the predictable, even when it hurts, feels safer than the unknown of joy. In this context, self-sabotage is not a flaw in judgment. It's a defense mechanism. It's a way of maintaining a story that, while painful, still gives you a sense of place in the world. The question Freud might leave hanging in the air is, do you really want to be happy? Or do you just want to maintain the narrative that gives your pain meaning? Yes, your pain may have taught you a lot, but maybe, just maybe, it's time to start learning without it. Chapter 4. The Harsh Superego. Inside the mind, there's a structure that watches, criticizes, and demands. Freud called it the superego, the psychic instance that holds the voice of rules, morals, prohibitions, and inherited expectations. This structure isn't something you're born with. It's built over time, through looks, corrections, silent punishments, and conditional love from parents, from teachers, from religion, from society. At first, it seems like guidance, but over time, it begins to weigh, especially when it becomes rigid. The harsh superego doesn't allow rest, it doesn't forgive mistakes, and it turns any attempt at pleasure into guilt. Even when everything is going well, something inside you whispers, you still haven't done enough. This is one of the most subtle forms of self-sabotage. You're not rejecting happiness. You simply can't feel worthy of it, and the judgment isn't coming from outside. You've internalized it. It became automatic. It became part of you. Freud saw the ego as the mediator between the demands of the id, instinct, and the pressure of the superego, moral law. But when the superego dominates, the ego weakens. And in that imbalance, anxiety grows. You try harder, but feel less satisfied. You achieve more, but don't celebrate. Because the superego doesn't want your peace. It wants your obedience. The solution isn't to silence it completely, but to bring awareness to it. To ask, is this inner demand truly mine, or something I inherited and never questioned? Happiness should not feel like a crime. It's not a reward. It's part of your emotional health. And no inner voice should convince you otherwise. Chapter 5. The Fear of Losing Love. Not all self-sabotage is about fear of failure. Often it comes from a deeper place. The fear of losing love. Freud understood that many of our self-limiting behaviors are not caused by laziness or lack of desire, but by the unconscious belief that happiness might cost us connection. From early childhood, we begin to associate love with specific emotional roles. Some people only felt seen when they were struggling. Others learned that being small, invisible, or less than was what kept them accepted. And the lesson remains, if I change too much, I'll lose them. This creates a conflict between the desire for fulfillment and the fear of isolation. You might downplay your victories, hold back your ideas, abandon dreams not because they're impossible, but because something in you believes they'll create distance. You tell yourself, if I succeed, they'll envy me. If I grow, they'll leave. If I'm truly happy, I'll be alone. So the mind adapts. It dims your light to preserve the bond. It trades authenticity for belonging. Freud saw this often in his patients. Individuals stuck in a paradox. They wanted to live fully, but only felt safe in emotional structures where suffering was a form of loyalty. And sometimes it was. Pain became the common language. Limitation became the glue that held relationships together. But part of this psychoanalytic process is realizing that love, when it's real, can evolve. And when it can't, it's not your growth that is the problem. It's the relationship. Ask yourself, how much of yourself are you leaving behind just to be accepted? And what kind of love demands that you shrink to be kept? That's not love. That's dependency masquerading as connection. Chapter 6. The Trauma Behind Self-Worth. In psychoanalysis, self-worth is not just a matter of self-esteem or positive thinking. According to Freud, it is deeply rooted in the way the ego was formed during a childhood, especially in how it was seen, validated, or rejected by the first emotional bonds. When a child is repeatedly criticized, emotionally neglected, or made to feel invisible, the ego internalizes a distorted message. I am not enough. And this message doesn't disappear with age. It matures, masks itself, and continues to act silently in adult life, in relationships, work, and in how one reacts to praise, love, and success. Many people don't consciously believe they are unworthy, but their behaviors reveal something else. They downplay compliments, feel like frauds in moments of recognition, sabotage opportunities that would elevate them, not because they're afraid of failure, but because they don't feel worthy of succeeding. Freud understood that when the ego is built on fragile foundations, it struggles to expand. It resists joy. It distrusts peace. It interprets pleasure as an exception, not as a right. And so self-sabotage becomes a form of self-regulation, a way to maintain coherence with that old internal message, you don't deserve this. In therapy, we often see patients who are competent, admired, even loved, but who feel internally disconnected from everything they've built, as if none of it truly belonged to them. In reality, it's not a lack of capacity. It's a scar, a wound that was never fully recognized and therefore continues to shape choices. The work of analysis is to bring this unconscious wound into language, to help the individual understand that self-worth is not something they need to prove, but something they were never taught to feel. And perhaps the most honest question Freud would have asked here is, who convinced you that love must be earned through suffering? Because as long as that belief remains unconscious, it will continue to rule your life. Chapter 7. The unconscious wants to repeat. One of Freud's most fundamental concepts is the repetition compulsion, the unconscious tendency to relive painful situations from the past again and again, even when they no longer make sense in the present. This repetition isn't logical, it's not conscious, and it's rarely recognized for what it is. What the unconscious seeks, in truth, is not suffering itself, but mastery over something that once hurt you deeply. A kind of psychic reenactment where the subject unconsciously hopes for a different outcome this time. You return to similar relationships. You create the same emotional conflicts. You fall into patterns that feel strangely familiar, as if you're walking through an old scene with new characters. Freud noticed this pattern in countless patients, people who repeated the very dynamic they swore they wanted to escape. And when asked why, they often had no answer, because the truth is, you don't repeat because you want to suffer. You repeat because something inside you remains unresolved. And without elaboration, the mind clings to repetition as a strategy for survival. The problem is that repetition without awareness leads only to more frustration, more disappointment, more proof that nothing ever changes. Freud believed that the role of analysis is to transform repetition into narrative, to give meaning to the cycle, to name the trauma, and to offer the individual the possibility of making choices no longer governed by past wounds. When you bring the unconscious to the surface, you interrupt the cycle. You stop living on autopilot, and you begin to act from a place of clarity, not compulsion. So ask yourself, what part of your life feels new, but is actually just the same story playing out again? That answer may not come quickly, but when it does, it sets you free. You've just walked through 7 layers of the unconscious, mechanisms Freud mapped with precision over decades of clinical observation. 7 ways in which the mind, in its effort to protect, ends up keeping you away from the very happiness you seek. Freud never promised a fully healed mind. What he offered was something far more honest, the possibility of becoming conscious of what silently governs your life. Because As long as you don't see it, you repeat it. As long as you don't elaborate it, you transfer it. And as long as you don't own it, you sabotage yourself. Self-sabotage is not weakness, it's language. It's the unconscious trying to tell you something in the only way it knows how, through conflict, delay, and discomfort. But once you begin to listen, once you start naming what used to be just symptom, everything starts to shift. Pleasure stops feeling dangerous. Guilt loses its grip, and repetition gives way to choice. The happiness that once felt distant becomes possible, not by force, but by clarity. If any part of this video resonated with you, write in the comments, "I'm ready to break the cycle." That sentence, for someone who understands Freud, is not a declaration of strength. It's a sign of awareness. And that alone is already transformative. Share this video with someone who feels trapped in the same emotional script and doesn't know how to get out. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to keep exploring the deeper layers of self-awareness, psychoanalysis, and conscious living. And remember, the unconscious will continue acting with or without your permission. But if you have the courage to face it, you'll discover that the happiness you feared is the one you most